Whenever we look across the different cultures in our world, we will find many distortions of the marriage covenant as instituted by God. You will find things like polygamy, that is, a man taking more than one wife. Muslims, who make up about 25% of our world's population, their religion, Islam, allows a man to take up to 4 wives. You'll also find what is called polyandry, that is, a woman taking more than one husband at the same time. This practice is legal and acceptable in places like India, Tibet, South America, and in parts of Africa. In some cultures, you will find concubinage, that is, taking concubines, cohabiting with other women without the full sanctions of legal marriage. That is something that we find in Bible times, but it's not limited to Bible times. It is still practiced today in East Asia and especially in China. In some cultures, you will find easy divorce. In April 2022, no-fault divorce was introduced here in the United Kingdom, brought into force, where couples can actually get a divorce without having to state why. It was described as the biggest shake-up in divorce law for more than half a century. On and on the list could go. Adultery, promiscuity, so-called same-sex marriage, so on. But Jesus himself said in Matthew 19 and verse 8, "From the beginning it was not so." At the beginning, which we are looking at here in Genesis chapter 2, God ordained a monogamous permanent marriage. That is, a marriage to one person at a time, and between a male and a female, a relationship that is to last until death do them part. That is what we find here at the beginning, what God laid down at the very beginning for our good and for our blessing. God's command in verse 24 was, a man shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. The way to know true happiness in regard to a marriage relationship, true fulfillment, and the true accomplishment of God's purposes is to obey that command. Whenever we go against what God has so clearly laid down for us here, for our good at the beginning, then we can only expect to find and experience misery, unfulfillment, and a lack of meaning in our lives. And it's no wonder when we look around us in our society, as we see marriages falling apart all around us, and we see so much misery and unhappiness and unfulfillment in people's lives, it all comes back, friends, to the reality that we have turned our backs upon, we have rejected what God laid down here at the beginning in regard to marriage for our good. So I want us to consider again what God has laid down here, what God has told us in regard to marriage. First of all, the cornerstone of marriage. The cornerstone of marriage. Verse 24 says, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." This verse, this context here, clearly teaches us a very important truth. That is, that marriage was given to us by God. It was ordained by him here at the time of creation. God, the good and all-wise creator, knows what it takes for a society to be healthy and strong. He knew that marriage is the cornerstone of society. A society will not be healthy and strong and flourish unless it has marriage at the very center of it, marriage as God himself has ordained it. When you think of society, what is society? Society really is people living together in a more or less ordered community. That's what makes up a society. People living together in a more or less ordered community. And where does that begin? That begins with marriage. And that is then often extended into a family whenever children come along. That's the cornerstone, the foundation, friends, for larger society. We know how critical a foundation is for a building. No one would ever be as foolish as to erect a building without a foundation. We wouldn't expect that building to stand or that building to last if it didn't have a good foundation. Marriage and family are absolutely critical for the well-being of society. Friends, we cannot expect society to stand, society to be strong and to be healthy if it is not built on the solid foundation of marriage and family. It's been observed by anthropologists that anthropologists are those who study human life and behaviour. It's been observed by them that all around the world, across all religions and across all cultures, that successful societies are those that are based on marriage. So much depends upon it. If marriage is eroded or weakened, then other things that rely upon it are also eroded and weakened. If it breaks down, other things break down as well. We are told clearly here in our text that marriage was instituted by God from the very beginning. It was hardwired by God Himself into human society. It is just it's just part of the natural order of things. It's instinctive. Someone has said, fish swim in the water, beasts walk in the fields, birds fly in the air, and men and women marry. We have seen how Adam and Eve were given jobs to do. They were to fill the earth. They were to be good stewards of the earth's resources. They were to have authority over the creatures, and they were to work the garden. God gave all of that work to man to do whenever He created him and placed him there in the garden at the beginning. God wanted people to work and to be productive. We saw last week that God created woman to be a helpmate for man, a helper that was suitable for him, a helper that would be a complement to him. Together, men and women have complementary characteristics, and being like that, they would be able to carry out work that God had assigned them to do. Marriage is absolutely necessary to help the human race to do the jobs that it was meant to do. That is, to be good stewards of the earth's resources, to have children, and to raise them to be productive. So, God's design is a man marries a woman, they have children, they work hard, they raise their children, instilling into them a good work ethic, and in that way, humanity as a whole is able to carry out the work that God designed them to do. Now, of course, because of the fall, often things are not ideal, and often not everyone gets married or even has children or is even able to have children. But God's design there at the beginning was for a man to marry a woman, to have children, to work hard, and to raise their children, instilling into them a good work ethic. That is why a mother staying at home to raise her children, instead of handing them over to someone else to essentially raise, that is not a purposeless or a meaningless task. In fact, it's the very opposite. It is a very high calling and so essential for the human race to fulfill the purpose for which it was made. That is, to glorify God by doing the work that He has entrusted to it. Children were not meant to be just stuck in the corner, as so many are today, and just told to amuse themselves. Sadly, that is often what happens in many homes. Parents get so busy with work and other things, or are just too lazy to spend the time that they ought to with their children. The children are just put in the corner, something thrown at them to amuse them with, and that is sadly how many children are raised. But children are to be properly taught, instructed, trained, and shown by example how to be good, productive citizens of society. That's what God laid down here at the beginning when He instituted marriage, and then children coming along, and that is how the human race was to develop, was to reproduce, and to accomplish the work that God gave it to do. So the cornerstone of marriage. Marriage is absolutely foundational to society and to the health and well-being of society. Not only the cornerstone of marriage, but also the commonality or the universality of marriage. Verse 24, it says, "And therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." Marriage, having been instituted here at the beginning, at the very dawn of time itself, at creation, shows us that it is something that is universal. It's a creation ordinance that, just like the Sabbath is applicable to all people in all places and in all generations, right to the end of time. Marriage is not something that is unique to Christianity. It's universal throughout history and throughout all human cultures. The commonality or universality of marriage is part of God's common grace to all mankind. Whether people know the Lord or not, whether they acknowledge God or not, God has, in His goodness to them, instituted marriage as a blessing to them, as part of His common grace to all mankind. You know, some people think that marriage is just a Christian institution, and it's not really valid unless it's a Christian marriage. But as someone has said, if an atheist man marries an agnostic woman, if they commit themselves to each other for life to the exclusion of all others, then their marriage is just as biblically valid as two Christians who get married in church. Yes, ideally we want people to get married in church. If for no other reason, it's an acknowledgement that marriage is a gift and a blessing from God. And to have a wedding in a church, I believe, is acknowledging, thanking God in a public way that He has given us the blessing and the gift of marriage. And so ideally, yes, we would want everyone to get married in church. And even more ideally, we would desire that every marriage would be a Christian marriage, with the couple being saved, which brings a powerful dimension to their marriage, their love being modelled on the love of Christ. Ideally, that's what we would like. But unless we believe in universalism, which is the teaching that everyone is going to be saved, unless we believe that, then that's not going to happen. Every marriage is not going to be a Christian marriage. Ultimately, the bottom line is a couple are married whether they are married in church or not, whether they are saved or not, whether they're Christian or not. A false divide has been made between civil marriage and religious marriage. Those who advocate for so-called homosexual marriage, argue that that all they're wanting to do is to redefine civil marriage and leave religious marriage alone. They would say, oh, you Christians, if you want to have your religious marriage according to the Bible between a man and a woman, then that is all right. You have the right to do that. We will not stop you doing that. We want to redefine civil marriage to allow for same-sex marriage. The state is responsible for civil marriage, and so the government can redefine that. The church is responsible for religious marriage, and so they can define that. That's the argument that's made for homosexual marriage, making this division between civil marriage and religious marriage. But friends, no such divide can be made between religious marriage and civil marriage. Marriage is universal. It was ordained by God here at the beginning for all mankind. It can't be split between religious and secular lines. According to what God tells us here, Genesis chapter 2, there is only one definition of marriage. That is a man and a woman joined together for life to the exclusion of all others. That is true whether the ceremony is a religious one or a civil one, whether the ceremony takes place in Westminster Abbey or in a registry office. The couple enter the same legal union, the union of marriage. That is what we have here applied in verse 24 when God instituted marriage. He defined it, saying, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." So we have the cornerstone of marriage, we have the commonality of marriage, and then thirdly we have the command in marriage. The command in marriage. Verse 24, and Adam said, verse 24, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." When God instituted marriage here at the beginning, at the time of creation, he gave this command to any man who is getting married and becoming a husband. He's commanded to leave his father and his mother. And why is he to leave his father and mother? It is because a new unity is being formed between him and his wife. They who up until now were two separate individuals coming from two separate families, they are now coming together and becoming one. As two individuals, they are becoming a unit. A unity is being formed. "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." Someone has said, to become one, a couple has to do two things: leave and cleave. The husband has to leave. He has to step away from the protection and the support and the influence of his parents. And he and his wife then have to cleave to each other. The word cleave there, it really means to glue or to cement together. You think of gluing two objects together. They're two separate things, but you put the glue between them and you make those two objects to become one. Well, that's what happens in marriage. Two individuals, they're leaving their family unit, as it were, and they are cleaving, they are coming together to be one. Instead of being dependent on his parents, the husband and his wife now become interdependent on each other. It's so essential, friends, that we understand this. So essential that our young folk grasp this as they will contemplate marriage. Think about this. Before a man gets married, who is his primary responsibility towards, and his primary responsibility and loyalty towards? It is toward his parents, his father and his mother. That is why the Bible commands that children obey their parents, that they submit to their authority. God has ordained it at the family unit. Parents and children are the fundamental, the basic unit in life. The family unit is what holds our society together. A husband and wife together, bringing up children, teaching them the principles of obedience and respect. A lot of the problems in our society, friends, lawlessness, disrespect for authority, for people, for property, All of these problems can be traced back to the breakdown of the family unit. All attacks on the family unit, from the encouragement of single parenting, making divorce easier, so-called same-sex marriage, all of these attacks on the family unit, all of these things are weakening our society, because we are destroying the family unit, which is what makes our society strong. All of these attacks, friends, that is the ultimate result of them, is that we are weakening our society because we're attacking the thing that makes our society strong, that is the family unit. So the family unit is the basic unit in life. It's the very fabric of our society. And God's means of perpetuating, of continuing that, is marriage. Not cohabiting, but marriage. And what happens in marriage is that a man leaves his father and his mother. He steps out of that family unit that he has been a part of for 20, 25, 30 years. He now enters into a new unity. He enters into a new relationship with his wife and forms another and a new family unit. He becomes the head of that new family. That's what's taking place. That's what's happening whenever a couple get married. Now, what does that mean in practice? Does it mean that the man should never again take anything to do with his parents? That he shouldn't provide for them in any way or have any responsibility toward them? That he shouldn't care for them in old age and in failing health? Obviously, it doesn't mean that. Your parents will always be your parents. And it's your duty to look after them and to care for them and to support them as long as they live. So what does it mean then to leave your father and mother? It means that your primary responsibility is now toward your wife. You're now one with her. You have entered into a unity with her. You have become one flesh. You must think of yourself from now on not primarily as a child of your parents, but as a husband to your wife. All your life before now, you saw yourself as the child of your parents. That's how you viewed yourself as you grew up. You were the child of your parents. You submitted to their authority. You obeyed their commands. You followed their counsel and guidance. You were in a position of submission to them. But now you come out of that position of submission. You enter into a new position where you are now the one in authority. You are now the head of a new family. Does this mean that you never again obey your parents or listen to their advice? No, of course you can. But the difference is this, that now you are no longer under obligation to follow their advice and to do what they say. You respect them, you respect their advice, you respect their opinion, you care for them as your flesh and blood, but they cannot interfere in your new family unit. You are now the head of your new family unit. You're the boss, not your parents. You must not allow your parents to control you as they always have before. That relationship is finished. You know, so many marriage problems have been created by the interference of parents. I'm sure we all know sad stories in this regard, where parents have interfered in a marriage, overstepped the mark, and it has caused disastrous results. You see, the challenge is that for 20 or 30 years, or maybe more, that old parent-child relationship has existed. It's been in existence. It has become a habit to just automatically think and to act the way that your parents think and act. This is just natural for this to happen. As children grow up in the home, they they see in their parents, they act like them, they behave like them. And so it's just natural for children to think and to act like their parents. And then whenever you get married, it is very difficult to adjust to a different way of thinking and acting. What your wife has learned from her parents for 20 or 30 years. So often, this is where serious clashes come into a marriage. That is why it is a huge adjustment whenever a couple get married. You have your ways and means of doing things, habits that you've formed, that you've got from your parents, and your wife is exactly the same. And that can be very different. And here you are coming together, and you do your things your way, she does things her way, and unless that is handled very, very carefully, it is a recipe for serious clashes taking place. One of the big adjustments whenever you get married is that you and your wife do some things very differently. Example, she likes to perhaps arrive 10 minutes before the time to pick up the children from school. You like to arrive just as the children are walking out of the school door. Or she might fill up the kettle to the very top to boil two cups of tea. You, conscious of your electric bill, just fill it up to the exact amount. You see, you do things differently. All of these things are carried over from our previous families. I don't know how many times it's been said in our house, oh, that's a Burke thing. We acquire our habits from our parents and how they do things. That is just natural. And then whenever we get married and our wife does things differently, the danger is we dictate that it must be done our way, which is really our parents' way. When it comes to these things, we must leave our father and our mother, and that includes their habits and their ways of doing things. Maybe we just need to do things a little differently in our new family unit. You, as the head of your new family, need to work out a compromise on some of these issues. Or let your wife do it the way she likes. Sometimes it's not that big a deal how it's done, so don't make it a big deal. The principle here is that your first loyalty is now to your wife. You parents who have married children, you need to realize that too. You must not interfere in their marriage relationship. All parties need to realize that a new unit has been formed. The man is the head of that new family. He is no longer in the position of being in submission to the authority of his parents. He is now in the position of being the one in authority in his new relationship. So friends, we have God's way for marriage clearly laid down for us here. Are we prepared to follow that and know the blessing that it brings? Does God not know ultimately what is for our good and for our blessing? Of course he does. He's the one who ordained marriage. He knows exactly how it works. He knows exactly how it will work best. And he has laid down for us here, a man is to leave his father and his mother. He's to cleave to his wife. They become a new family unit. And when we follow that, what God has laid down for us, then we will know God's blessing upon our marriages. And surely that should be our desire in these days. We're seeing even Christian marriages being brought under attack as never before in these days. Sadly, Christian marriages fail as well. We need to get back to what God has laid down for us. Recognize that his way is always the best way. We think we know sometimes what is the best way, but God ultimately does. And he has laid down what is for our good. And if we decide to reject that, if we decide to go our own way and to do our own thing, then we will wreak the havoc of rejecting God's good and perfect way. I pray that all of our marriages will be strong. I pray that all of us will be given the grace to follow what God has laid down, these principles that He's laid down for our good, that we might follow them, and we might all know God glorifying marriages that would be an example to the world out there of what it's like to live God's way and not the way of the world. We're so often influenced by the world, aren't we? The things that we see around us, the standards of others, what others do, their attitudes and how they handle things. So often we are influenced by that. May we as God's people get back to His Word, what God has laid down for us, and follow that. And may we all have strong, healthy marriage relationships that will honour and glorify God. We're going to close by singing